This might be controversial. I don't feel like he necessarily has any elite traits. Who is your number one?
All right, well, it's not Carson Strong. It's going to be Mr. Keeping on quarterbacks, and we're going to go to some quarterbacks in the draft because I think a lot of the fact that a lot of teams are grabbing a Matt Ryan, some of these guys, instead of maybe we've seen in previous years where teams will trade up to the top 5, even last year, for a quarterback. Doesn't seem to be this class that talented because obviously teams aren't doing so. But nonetheless, we're both going to throw out our top 5 rankings for these draft prospects. I sent John mine, so John knows my 5. I have no clue what John's 5 is. So we'll start at 5. I'll go first. My number 5 quarterback is Mr. Sam Howell out of North Carolina. It was a tough one. Sorry, pulling up my notes. So he has a really good arm. I'm not going to say great, but a pretty good arm. I liked how he's a big dude. Like, in the pocket, he can also move. He's like, hey, it's ironic we just talked about Baker. Kind of like, and a lot of people compare him because they talk the same, kind of the same demeanor. But yeah, he's like a less talented Baker Mayfield, but like more mobile. If I had to best compare it with him. Has, like I said, has good mobility, has a solid arm, can throw it from different arm angles. So he's kind of a natural thrower. Issue is, I'm going to the negatives. There are just times where he's inconsistent with his accuracy, a little bit of sloppy feet, and then also just too reliant on his arm. I think it can be a blessing, but it gets out of his mechanics, and then sometimes he'll throw some from odd platforms, and just the ball doesn't go where he wants to. But sometimes he'll make the darndest plays. So it's a bit of a yin-yang there. But another big issue, too, I feel was why I'm having my 5, bit of a slow release. So, it's easy for – I feel like at the next level, it's going to be tough to, fit the balls through tough windows, or those balls maybe get batted down by, these pro-level big defensive linemen, which, that's not what you want. And then the last thing, too, is I feel like because he's such a big dude and he has such a great arm, just stays in the pocket just too long. There are times like you got to get out of dodge, but he's just trying to be like old school Big Ben per se, and just stay like, I'm gonna stay in the pocket and I'm just gonna fit this ball in there. But then he gets hit, and then the ball doesn't go where he wants to, or something of that sort. But yeah, in regards to where I think he'll go round wise, talent wise, I see him as like a third round type of guy. He could develop maybe into a solid starter, but I think that's about his limit. I don't see a lot of elite traits out of him. But so yeah, I think he'll be a very good backup / maybe a serviceable starter at best. But those are my thoughts on Sam Howell. I don't know if you had any. Who's your number 5? Let me just throw that there because I'm sure we'll have a similar. We'll talk about mostly the similar guys.
So my number 5 is actually different. I have at number 5 Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. To me, I like Desmond Ridder, the athlete. I don't like Desmond Ridder, the quarterback. I think he has really good speed. He's a great runner. He's got really good size. I think he's like 6'3", 6'4". He definitely has some room to grow into that frame because he's not necessarily super bulky. But that happens when you get to the NFL. That's not a problem right there. So I really like his athleticism. He ran like a 4.52 40 time at the combine. And so I really like all the stuff that he has when it comes to his athleticism. The issues I have, and this is why I just don't think he's going to be a super successful NFL quarterback, unless he gets in a very specific scheme where there's a lot of read option, quick stuff that's short and underneath, is the ball placement. I think that he just doesn't really throw a good football personally. I think he has some accuracy issues. I think that he's able to process things pretty quickly and make quick decisions, but that doesn't always mean that they're good decisions. And so I don't love the decision making, and I don't really love the ball placement and the accuracy. And so I just think ultimately, yes, in the modern day NFL, you do want to have athleticism and be able to run, but if you can't pair that with a solid ability to throw, I don't know how successful you're going to be. So yeah, and I don't want to, sound too harsh because hearing that back, I think that was pretty harsh saying he can't throw. He can throw the ball, and these are fixable things. But at least right now, those are my biggest concerns. So he's at number 5 for me. Are we doing snake drafts, or do you want me to throw it back to you?
Throw it back to me because
Okay.
he's my number 4, and I think
All
it'd
right.
be interesting to keep the. And I had the same concerns, and it was really tough between him and Sam Howell. I feel like Howell's a
Mhm.
better polished, like so part of this too, and you will see it later in my ranking. It's like, what's your preference,
Right.
especially with this draft? It's tough because no one really pops out at least. And yeah, I had Ritter at 4, kind of in the same range. I say third round, kind of like you mentioned, a guy that he's going to need time to sit. He's going to need and you got to hope that you can fix some of his mechanics. And it's not like he's. I know people always want to say, well, Josh Allen, but Josh Allen he didn't need that many tweaks in his. He needed to change his decision making, but that a mental thing is easy to coach. Um, but yeah, you mentioned his size, and especially when I watched the Alabama game, and you mentioned his accuracy issues. I mean, part of his mechanics are off because it's such a slow release. It's even slower, I would say, than Howell's. That he's what you say, he's like 6'3", right? But he was getting balls
Yeah.
batted down a lot, especially in key passing situations. And it's just because it's easy to anticipate because of the windup that he does. So that's something, and I'm not sure if that's something that he can fix relatively quickly, but it's the NFL level, so maybe it's something that they can resolve. But yeah, you mentioned inconsistent thrower, and once again, I hate to be harsh, but we mentioned it before. Like I dogged on Big Ben last year, and Big Ben's a legend, but you gotta hit, especially the 10-yard within throws. Like the great quarterbacks, that's like those are like layups to them. They don't really
Yeah.
miss those, and you have to hit those in the NFL. And yes, you can miss, a 15 plus throw every now and then, maybe in a tight window. But Ritter just does that too often, and it's just too inconsistent. And even at the college level, much less at the pro level, where there's gonna be tighter windows. And I'm just not confident in some terms if that he can be a good pocket passer, at least coming out right now. But there is the upside, like you mentioned. Maybe he can find a Taysom Hill role. I'm not saying he is Taysom Hill, uh, or maybe he could just be that type of player and grow into that. So yeah, he was my number 4 guy. Once again, it was very tough. Like in regards to tiers, these two guys are in that third round tier. Do you like the more athletic raw prospect for me, or was it the more polished guy? I kind of went with Ritter, but I don't know who you have a 4. But if you had Howell at 4, I'd be like, yeah, understandable. So who do you have at 4?
Yeah, it's Sam Howell. The only differentiating factor between the two, because like you said, I think they're very similar in terms of tiers, is I think that Sam Howell's a better deep ball thrower.
Yeah.
He actually throws a really good deep ball. I'm not going to say it's the best in the class, and also just caveat to anyone listening, I'm very low on this class. Like I think there's maybe one quarterback I would take in the first round. But anyway, I think that he has one of the better deep balls of the class. But the biggest issue for me is that his numbers and his overall production really dipped after a lot of their playmakers left to go to the NFL draft. And obviously, in the NFL, you're going to have playmakers really no matter what team you're on. But at the same time, I just feel like his best years in college, he was a little more reliant on the top tier options that they had at the skill positions, for running back, receivers, tight ends, all those guys, because they had a lot of really productive players in college that are now in the NFL. So that part concerns me. Also, I mean, I don't want to say that size is a big issue, but he is 6'1", so he's on the sort of smaller side of quarterbacks. And I don't think that his arm talent is necessarily like crazy off the charts. So there's nothing that really wows me about him except for his agility, which is weird because I don't think that he's like the most mobile quarterback. But in college last year, he forced 65 missed tackles, which is the most by a Power 5 quarterback since 2014, which is just a really weird stat. I don't think that he's going to be incredible at running in the NFL, but I do think that he has some sort of that short field quickness that can help him in sort of like some situations, maybe when the pocket's under siege and you just got to improvise a little bit. But I agree with you. I don't think that he's a starting NFL quarterback. I think that he's a guy that's going to take some time, have to learn, have to, get better at a lot of things. And yeah, I think that him and Ritter are pretty interchangeable. I think that he's just a bit better with throwing, like you said, with preference. If I got to pick a guy, I'd rather get a guy who's better at throwing, just because I think it's more versatile for scheme fit. But regardless, yeah, I think they're both in that 4 or 5 range in the class.
Yeah. Alrighty. So now we go to number 3. My number 3 was Mr. and he just had his pro day, I believe, today. That we're recording. Malik Willis out of Liberty. Lots to like from Malik. I mean, especially in terms of his arm. I think he has, if not, he has one of the better arms definitely in the class. He definitely showed it off in his pro day today. Good scrambler. I know everyone was saying some people were theorizing he's a really good, he'd be really fast. Some more like, just from what I watched, doesn't have the speed of it, and he's not in that even class of speed. He's a good runner, but he's not going to be dusting people for 20, 30-yard runs. Nonetheless, obviously good arm, good scrambler. Kind of like you mentioned with Howell. He has good short area quickness. I think that's mainly because of his strong lower. He's got strong legs. Like, he's a tough dude to take down. I know he played at Temple, but they did play a few. They played Ole Miss.
Liberty.
Liberty. I'm sorry. I'm mixing my small schools. But nonetheless, he showed that he can escape the pocket, break tackles. He can throw at different arm angles. For the most part, he's still pretty accurate when doing that. There are times when it's not, and this is where we go to some of my negatives. And this one's tough because maybe it's the system, but I mentioned with our friend Cody and maybe and you played Madden. There's the people you can tell they go 1 read, 2 read, scramble. That's their mindset. I'm gonna run 1 read. They don't go to the 3rd read, and maybe that's just something that he was taught in Liberty. I'm sure that's something that be coached out of him, but that concern leads to my next one, which is he doesn't really field to field, and I just didn't see a lot of anticipation throws. There's a lot of screens, slants, and goes at Liberty. And even when it wasn't that, when there was an in cut or just a throw that required anticipation and timing, he either wouldn't pull the trigger or didn't pull the trigger. It was late on the throw or early on the throw, and it was incomplete or was a bad decision. It ended up being a poor throw. And that may be more attributed to his feet too. But once again, I think overall his anticipation needs a bit work. Like I mentioned, his feet can lead to, I feel like, some inaccuracy because he's going just 1-2 and then he's thinking run. And then just lastly, I think because of his physical ability, sometimes this is good or bad, but for him mostly, I feel like this is more like decision making. Got to clean up on the hero ball. Just sometimes, once again, I think that's just more accuracy. Where he's just trying to do too much. I'm gonna talk about my other top 2 guys later. I would like to see him throw the ball away a little bit more. But once again, I think that's very coachable. That's something that, like I said, I mentioned Josh Allen. That's something he had to learn was, hey, just throw the ball away. Just live to see another day. You don't have to force the ball downfield and into a completion. So that is my number 3 guy. All right, so yeah, and then before I throw it to John, range for Liberty's Malik Willis, say late first, second is where I would put him. So, all right. What about you, John? Who is your number 3 prospect for this 2022 class?
This might be controversial, but my number 3 is Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. I know a lot of people have him number 1. A lot of people bring up the whole thing of he's the most NFL ready, all that kind of stuff. And I would agree that I think Kenny Pickett, for the most part, has the highest floor. But like you mentioned earlier, when we talk about preference, to me, my preference is I'm going after a guy that I think could potentially be a long-term franchise quarterback, and not just that, but a potential top 10 guy. And so to me, I just don't really ever see that in Kenny Pickett's future. I think that he's going to be a solid QB, but I just feel like his sort of ceiling and what he can do for his whole career is going to be similar to guys like Jimmy Garoppolo or Ryan Tannehill or Baker Mayfield or some of these middle of the pack guys that are around 16, 17, 18 best quarterback in the league. And don't get me wrong. I mean, especially for example, Ryan Tannehill, some of those guys can have top 10 production in the right scheme. And I think that's the same thing for Kenny Pickett. But the reason that I have him at number 3 is I don't feel like he necessarily has any elite traits. Now, I also think that he doesn't have any specific weaknesses that I'm like, wow, that's terrible, outside of the hand size. But I also don't think the hand size is that big a deal. I know some people love to focus on like that one specific thing, and really, bring a guy down for it. But like Joe Burrow was criticized for his hand size, and although his hands are bigger than Kenny Pickett's, I mean, look at what he's doing in the league. So I don't think that's going to be the end of the world for Kenny Pickett. I think that he can be an NFL starting quarterback right away. But once again, I don't know about like his long-term potential and what he can be. I just think there's sort of a limited ceiling to, what he can become just based on his physical gifts, and then overall just the way that he plays. So I think Kenny's a really good quarterback, but also he's, I believe, the oldest out of the bunch for the top 5 that we've listed. So yeah, I have Kenny Pickett at number 3. Who's your number 2?
All right, so my number 2, and this was a tough one between 2 and 1. But my number 2 is Mr. Matt Corral from Ole Miss. Yeah, it's a name that really I feel like I've just seen Pickett and Willis up there, and Mox. Don't really know why Corral's isn't. But anyways, the good on Corral, very good quick release, which once again you're gonna need in the NFL. But on top of that too, he has really good. I mean, his arm strength is okay. He may not have like the strength deep ball like Malik can launch it, but in terms of the the intermediate throws, 10, you got to fit the 10-yard bullets in there. He can do that. I think he has the best like I would call it, that's more of a fastball. He has the best fastball in regards to that. He throws the most consistent spirals out of everybody, and he's just a natural thrower. He was a tough eval because I had to go back and watch his tape from 2 years ago mainly in regards to his pocket presence / mobility, because this last year he was dealing with he dealt with an ankle injury, I believe, throughout the year. Then he also got even injured during their bowl game as well. So it's like it was tough to properly evaluate that part of his game, which may be why I'm a little bit down on him. But I thought he was actually solidly mobile, which I liked. Only question is, a few questions I have is, I kind of mentioned it with Malik Willis, and I don't use this as too much of a negative, just more of a concern. Is the college system kind of similar? It's the RPOs where it's you get a handoff, and then because it's an RPO and it's usually a free guy, you have to kind of make a quick decision. Unlike the NFL, where most teams you're gonna have to drop back, go through read 1, 2, 3, and then check down. While in college, that system is more just 1, 2, okay, and then run. Now, granted, like I mentioned, natural thrower. I love the fact that he can throw from different angles. Also, kind of like I mentioned with Malik Willis, except he's a little bit more consistent in doing so. It's I think he puts the ball more on target even while on the move. So I like that about him. But lastly, and this isn't a huge knock. I'm just saying, it could be not the thickest of like Malik Willis is a thick dude, like top to bottom. And I mentioned you saying with Desmond Ridder and Howell. I'm not sure this will be a question mark, but it is right now. And I'm just like nitpicking here. Durability is a little bit of a question mark. Like I mentioned, got injured in the bowl game. So we'll have to see if he can withstand the whole NFL season. Now, granted, he could easily be fixed. Like I said, if he's probably not going to be running the option and keeping it himself as much as he did in college and putting himself in harm's way. And especially if he's going in the range which I expect him to, which I expect him to be first round. I mean, maybe early second if there's like something off the field or something medical that we don't know about. But if I'm guessing just off what I know, I would say he's a first round guy. I wouldn't say necessarily top 10. I would say probably after that is where he would land. I think the same would go for our number 1 guy. But yeah, just injury concern and maybe just questions about if he can translate quickly into the NFL. I think he will. It just may not be as seamless as my number 1 guy. So I have Matt Corral at number 2. Who do you have, John?
My number 2 is Malik Willis from Liberty. I agree with everything you already said. I think he's got really great arm strength. I do think his athleticism is a bit overrated by some people. And once again, for the record, I'm restating this. I'm not super high in this quarterback class, so I actually wouldn't even take him in the first round personally, because I think he's a lot more of a project. We talk about last year's class with Trey Lance. I think he's more of a project than Trey Lance was.
Yeah, Trey Lance. I would agree.
Yeah.
I was low
So
on Lance coming out.
yeah, and so was I. But anyway, I think that he's got a really great arm. I think that he does have some athleticism, some speed that he can make plays down the field. Um, and so he has that elite capability or that elite quality that I think can really propel him if he can fix the other stuff. The other stuff being the ball placement, the decision making, some sort of the quickness in the pocket, the footwork, some of those things. I just think that he's really lacking. But at the same time, he was at Liberty. So like he didn't necessarily have like access to the best staff in the country. And that's no shot at the coaching staff over at Liberty or even the teammates or anything that's over there. But I think that once you get into the NFL, some of those things are fixable. Some of those things are coachable. But the biggest issue for me that keeps him from being number one and from, in my opinion, being a first round quarterback is the accuracy in the ball placement. I think that it's pretty rough. There's, he can make some amazing throws that really just make you go, wow, that's incredible. But then like the next play, he can make one of the worst throws you've ever seen in your life. So I just think that he's too up and down. But like I said, in my personal preference, I'm going for a guy that I think has the potential to be top 10. I think that he has one of the highest ceilings in the whole class so he can figure things out. But he's a guy that I would draft and I would sit him for a couple of years. I like the fit of potentially Pittsburgh just because you got Trubisky for a couple of years. You can let Malik Willis sit and then maybe he becomes your guy, something like that. Atlanta, with Mariota, a situation in which you have a stopgap quarterback, or maybe you have an aging veteran that you potentially want to replace like Matt Ryan or something like that. So I think he absolutely needs to sit just because of all those issues, but I think most of them are fixable. And when it comes to the things that are not fixable or coachable, I think that he's off the charts in all those areas when it comes to his speed, his throw power, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, he's my number two. Who is your number one?
All right, well, it's not Carson Strong. It's going to be Mr. Kenny Pickett. I already alluded to, like he's already pro ready. He's very good at going through his progressions. Not as good as like a Joe Burrow or a Mac Jones, but he's there. And you did mention his age. I mean, that's to be expected of an older quarterback. Consistent thrower, like I mentioned. Him and Corral both are probably the most consistent throwers of the class. And I mean that by, they typically get the ball where they want to and in good spots for especially within that key 10 and under yard area. Those that are gimmies or have to be gimmies in the NFL. You did mention, and I will point out, not a lot of. I don't see a lot of eliteness from him, which I can understand why some would be down on him. He has a good arm, not going to be a great arm. He has good mobility. He does have a solid pocket presence. He can, move around and extend the play a little bit there, and stay in the pocket as well. I like his decision making once again, even outside of the pocket, willing to throw the ball away. If nothing's there, if he's improvising. You mentioned the hand size and gloves, which I don't think is that big of an issue. Only issue is that could come up with, especially with the gloves, maybe. And I mentioned not like just an okay arm is if he has to play in late December, especially not in a dome. And granted, there's only like about 10, 12 quarterbacks that can really be unaffected by the weather because of how good they are, how tight the spiral is, how powerful their arm is, that it won't matter. But I feel like that could be a concern. I look at, guys like Jared Goff, who have, smaller hands, not saying it's a concern, but who have struggled in the poor weather. And I just have questions in regards to the gloves, too. That could be a concern. But nonetheless, yeah, I just went with him. He's the safest pick. Once again, I don't think he's a top 10 type talent. I think he's a first round guy. I thought, especially, I don't think the Colts have a first round pick, but if there was a team that was really needing a quarterback like the Colts, maybe Seattle, but even then they have Drew Lock now. So I see Pickett as a first round guy, middle to end. Like if I had to compare him to last year's class, I forgot where I had them ranked exactly, but he'd probably be in the behind Trey Lance near the Kellen Mondish area, him and Corral. So, yeah, I'm with you. Lower class, but yeah, Kenny Pickett's my number one quarterback prospect, which leaves you. Who is your number one quarterback prospect for your rankings?
Also, not Carson Strong. My number one, Matt Corral from Ole Miss. I'm going to start off with just some of the weaknesses, get these out of the way. I do agree with you. I think that maybe the scheme is a little bit of a weakness. I think there's some parts of it that I also view as a strength. They ran like 60% of the time play action.
Yeah.
And so I think in certain schemes that can be really beneficial. The big issue with all that and the quick RPOs and all that kind of stuff, like you mentioned, is he didn't really show a lot on tape when it came to moving past the first read. And that's in large part because oftentimes he would either throw to the first read or he would take off if he didn't have it. And I think that's a fixable thing. That's a coachable thing. Also for Matt Corral, like you said, the other big issue, and I mean, you said it's nitpicky, but I think you have to take it into account when it comes to the NFL, is his durability. He's had a couple injuries throughout college. He did play in that bowl game and got hurt against Baylor. And that's something that you have to take into account because he has a sort of, I don't want to say he's small, but he has a slight frame. Like he's not a bulky quarterback. When you think of like Josh Allen's and Jameis Winston's and Big Ben's, like they have some size on them. To where you think of like Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson, like they're sort of skinny guys. I wouldn't say he's as skinny as those two, but he does have a slight frame that can hurt you when it comes to your injury history and trying to stay healthy. You want to put on those pounds, but once again, that's a fixable thing, and I imagine that that's something that he's probably working on because he knows about the injury history. But when it comes to the positives, I think he's actually the best athlete of the class. I think that he beats Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis in a race.
I can see that. I just didn't see it much on tape. Like,
yeah, he didn't run a 40 because of the injury. So we don't actually know like the true time that he has. But from what I have seen over the years, I think that he's a really excellent athlete. I think that he can really take off, which feels like what you want in the modern day NFL. And a lot of these quarterbacks in this class are actually relatively mobile. So don't take this as me saying the rest of them aren't. But he just fits that sort of modern day. He can run when he needs to sort of quarterback. But I also think that he has the arm talent to match. I don't think that he has the best arm talent in the class, but when it comes to every single area, like the full package of it, I think he's got the best. Good deep ball thrower. He has some great arm strength, not necessarily as much as Malik Willis, but it's close. And I think that he can hit throws at every single level. I also don't think that his ball placement is necessarily super bad. Like I've heard some people have sort of criticized his placement. I think that he actually has pretty solid accuracy for the most part. Now, obviously, there are some throws he can clean up. I don't think he's as accurate as Kenny Pickett is. And I don't think he has this, the decision making that Kenny Pickett does, but I think that he's not far behind in either of those categories. So ultimately, to me, Matt Corral, he's the number one quarterback. I think that just in the way the modern day NFL is moving, with these guys who can make throws from different arm angles, who can use their athleticism to make plays with their feet. I mean, look at that Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes duel in the playoffs. Defenses against quarterbacks, they're just putting so many players back in coverage now. If you can beat them with your arm, you have to be able to run. And so I think that he has the athleticism to do that. And then overall, I think he's the most complete quarterback out of the class. That being said, I agree with you. I don't think that he necessarily holds a candle to some of the QBs that came out last year. But he's the only quarterback, in my opinion, I would take in the first round. I would take him in the mid to late first round, a team that, once again, maybe has another quarterback that they're willing to let him sit for a year, fix some of those issues, get healthy, and then he can come back the year after and be your starter. But yeah, Matt Corral, he is my number one quarterback in the class.
Yeah, Matt was almost. It was like 1A, 1. I mentioned it last year, but this was almost like 1A, 1B for me. I just went with the more safe-ish pick.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. I checked it out a little bit, and it's just tough too. Like you mentioned, it's especially a quarterback self-evaluating the system. Kenny Pickett ran more of a pro style, so you got to see him go through the progressions. Well,
right.
Corral ran the RPO spread stuff, and he also played in the SEC. So it's tough to run that and have time to go through all your progressions because most of the FCC have good defenders and they have guys coming in that system regardless. Like I said, you're gonna have a free blocker sometimes, so you got to make your reads. They only have maybe time for one read or two read and then run. So it's tough to, it's that's why I mentioned. I think you hit on too. Just hard to we're not holding the systems against them. We're just saying the systems didn't help them in this way. We just didn't get to see them do certain things. So,
Right.
but yeah, I'm with you. I think it wouldn't shock me. I just want to say that if that like we're here a year from now and like, man, Corral is way better than Pickett. I will say Corral has definitely more upside. I think he's the only one in this class that, well, besides him and Willis, but I think he's a more first, like percentage wise. I think he would be more. I'd be more confident that he could become a superstar / star. Well, I think Kenny Pickett could at best be a star, but probably be like more of a average-ish quarterback. And that's no offense to Pickett. I mean, but he made it to the NFL. It's more than most people can say. So, and same with Willis. I feel like Willis could be a star, but he could also. I could also see him being like an average quarterback-ish. So, obviously, we have to see where the dice fall, where they go, because like you mentioned, there's not a lot of space. We're in a weird spot where like it's a lot of good young quarterbacks, and then there's the old ones. Brady came back. Matt Ryan's still hanging around. Rodgers is still playing. So there's still a lot of quarterbacks available.
Right.
I mean, heck, that's one of the reasons why we just talked about why the Browns are having trouble kind of getting rid of Baker, because there's not a lot of teams that are desperate for quarterbacks. So we'll see where they fall, and obviously we'll be doing our mocks down the road. So maybe we'll be placing them in certain spots where we like them. But yeah, so those are the quarterback top 5 rankings. I'm going to go over mine real quick, and then you can just go over yours. I have Sam Howell at 5 out of North Carolina. I have Desmond Ridder at 4 out of Cincinnati. 3 is Malik Willis from Liberty. I almost said Temple again. 2 is Matt Corral from Ole Miss. And then my number 1 guy is Kenny Pickett. Once again, Corral, Pickett right there at 1, 2. They could be interchangeable for me. And then 4 and 5 are also kind of interchangeable. And Willis is kind of knocking on the door for 1, 2, but there's just a little bit too much rawness for me to put him comfortably with those 2. So, and then you can go over yours.
Yeah, my top 5 at number 5, Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. At number 4, Sam Howell, North Carolina. Number 3, Malik Willis from Liberty. Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. Number 2, Malik Willis from Liberty. And number 1, Matt Corral from Ole Miss.